on the Tubcast podcast, and I run mountainstoic.wordpress.com also.
Stoic. Yes, I've heard of all of these things and all of you guys by name, but I've never had the pleasure of meeting you. So,
welcome to the internet.
Okay. Well, we are live, actually. That means the whole world is watching. And like I said, I don't know how to tell. Oh, wait, there is a box here that says how many viewers there are. Right now, no one's entered the room yet.
Is this also being recorded?
Yes. I wasn't planning on using it. I was planning on just deleting it.
Pretty much goes straight out to YouTube, doesn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
It takes a while. It's got to process first, and especially if we're like talking for 30, 45 minutes or an hour, it'll take a while for that file to actually load.
Okay. If it is possible, I would like to get the recording afterwards. Sure.
Okay. I'll make sure and preserve it.
Thank you.
Okay. So I am bouncing around real quick just to see if anyone has made any noise about when's this going to start. Because there are a few people that said they're definitely going to come as audience members, not as room participants.
So today is Stoicon, right? The actual day of Stoicon is today, correct?
No, I don't think so. I think isn't it on Sunday?
Yeah, maybe you're right.
I think we should officially change the name to the Facial Hair Hangout.
That'll leave me out. I'm only good for like half a year at a time.
Yeah, you don't normally have a beard, do you? Are you getting ready for deer season or something there, Mark?
No. I think I'm just going to do like equinoxes. One equinox I shave, the other one I stop shaving.
Well, I can't deal with the itchiness anymore. It comes off. I'll grow back.
So, Daniel, are you in Austin or Houston?
I'm in Houston.
Oh, okay, yeah. What part of town you live in?
I'm in the kind of inside the loop near the medical center, a little south of Rice University.
Right. That's a nice area. Yeah.
Yeah, we enjoy it a lot.
I think my daughter is right there next to you.
Oh, really? Does she go to Rice?
No, she's going to Baylor. But no, actually, she was living at a convent. It was a sister house. I forget what they call it, but it's a place where a bunch of Catholic sisters live, and she was able to snag a room. And while she was going to school to become a PA, and now she's in Temple, but doing rotations.
And where's everybody else located?
I am in. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which is about 50 miles east of Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
I am currently in Dallas. Although, Ben, I'm actually from Morgantown, so just 50 minutes south of you.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And I'm in Frisco, which is just north of Dallas.
Okay.
I grew up in
Texan here.
I guess so. Well, I don't know. Kevin's just on loan.
I don't count, yeah.
You never actually leave West Virginia is the thing.
Well, fate permitting, we'll be back there this time next year, so.
And Ben, it's good to see you again, by the way. Hope
you've
been
well. And I guess for the sake of the recording, I blog at approximatelyforever.com, occasionally on Stoicism, sometimes on Confucianism or Buddhism or whatever else grabs my attention, sometimes on cigars or whatever my kids are up to, so all over the place.
It's good
so,
to have that flexibility.
Can we put notes below this, Mark? When it's out on YouTube, you can put little notes below for like Daniel and Ben and Tubcast and all of that, right? For people who are interested.
But I wasn't planning on saving it, but I can if there's a popular demand requires it.
So do we have an agenda, or what do we want to talk about? Or do we want to talk about what's going on in Stoicism today, or we want to talk about what we're doing individually for Stoic Week, or do you have an agenda, Mark?
I didn't have an agenda.
Otherwise?
I had a few things I had a few things I thought would be good to talk about. I thought talk about Stoicon, talk about our experiences, our personal experiences with Stoic Week in the past. Talk about the handbook that came out, and the forum. I haven't participated at all in the forum, so I don't really know what's going on there. And whatever else just related to Stoic Week. But definitely plug your blogs. That's one of the benefits of showing up to the room and making yourself vulnerable to the whole world.
Well, I'm not real familiar with Stoicon. This is my first time participating in Stoic Week. I've been enjoying it, going by the handbook and reading and doing the daily exercises. One thing it has taught me is that my life is far too busy, because it's been difficult even to do this fairly light demand on my time, just to keep up with it and to fit it in. And these are very manageable things. And yet, to take a few minutes here and there throughout the day ends up being more challenging than I would have thought. And so, yeah, it tells me a lot about the pacing of my life and making me think about that more.
I'm surprised that it's your first Stoic Week.
Yeah, I've been involved in Stoicism, as you know, for a long time, but never actually participated in the Stoic Week formally before. One of the reasons I'm doing it, in fact, is because our education director, I'm with the Spiritual Naturalist Society, for anybody viewing this later. And in the Spiritual Naturalist Society, our education director is Brandon Newberg, and he had the idea that a lot of us should participate and help promote it with our organization to our members and subscribers. And so I thought that was a great idea, and we've got several people on our staff doing it. And so we're all taking notes, and then once it's all over with, we're going to write up what our experience was with it and try to publish that and help get the word out.
Cool idea.
I think the handbook, it just gets better and better. This is technically the fourth one I've been to. They didn't really have much of a handbook on the first one, and it was just really the thing they put up on the University of Exeter. And so this is really the third one, and the handbook is really, it just seems to be less scattered, more smoothly done this year than ever before. But
Yeah,
I'm like you,
words.
Daniel, I've had a lot of trouble keeping up with doing much more than the bare bones stuff, like maybe one meditation in the afternoon or the evening, and try and put one pithy saying of some form, hopefully of my own, on the forum every day. But I wanted to do a lot more writing, like writing in my notebook every day about changing emotions and things like that, and it's just been tough, to keep up with it all.
One of the things I'd like to see with future iterations of the handbook is something almost more workbook quality. So in the section on the CBT documenting of feelings and thoughts, a small chart there for actually doing that. So for the meditations, a few blank lines and a prompt, and to turn the handbook, rather than just oh wait, I have to go read the evening meditation, reference again, what was that, to something that you're actually engaged with throughout Stoic Week and throughout the process. I think that would be an interesting and useful addition.
Like actual guided exercises, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about an actual kind of printed and staple bound little deal that they could mail out to you, so you have a physical little booklet?
Well, they had a couple of thousand, about 2,000 participants this year.
That's a lot of.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. I guess it's not really practical.
Well, I got mine. I got the EPUB and just put it onto my Nook. I really like it that way. The PDF didn't work for me, but the EPUB worked really well.
Yeah, that's what I did. I put it onto my phone.
Yeah, I've been doing it electronically too, but I think next time I'm going to try the printout and doing everything by hand. I think there's some different quality to handwritten journal. And I don't know. It's like I'm doing kind of an electronic journal at the same time, and I haven't been doing the handwritten thing this time, but I've done it before in the past. And for me personally, I guess everything takes place on the screen all the time, and something feels more real to me if I'm doing something physical, maybe. I don't know.
Electrons are cheap, and it's easy to say, oh, I throw this away. I don't really care what I do. But if you're going to put it on paper, you think, you know what? I'm going to see this again, and I want it to say something real.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'll print out the workbook next time and then have, I don't know, something like that. I haven't really been doing anything on the forums, so I need to get on there and do that. And then if we can get this recording of this, I'm also going to use this to help promote it. Send people to the recording after the fact of this, and hopefully that'll help spread the word about Stoic Week.
My first hope, the pipe dream about the hangout, was to have a hangout every night of Stoic Week and go over what was in the handbook. But that was a little too much to chew. I guess the first try. Maybe next year we'll do a little bit more, but this time just kind of a overview of what's going on, what's in the handbook, what our experience has been. It's like you, Greg. I've done it a few years, and it's hard. Each year, I think, you know what? I did not give that the effort that I should have.
Heck, man, I'm on vacation this week, and I still can't get that much done. The vacation time is like money. The more you got, the more you'll waste. The more you'll spend. It just kind of spins out while you're not even thinking about it. And, doing stuff around the house, and had to take my cat to the hospital today and stuff. So it's like, damn, I'm just really busy for a guy who's on vacation. But it's been pretty good. I've been able to participate more than in previous years, so I like that.
This though that we're talking about is exactly what I think is missing in a lot of people talk about spirituality a lot these days, and very often it has to do with either things they proclaim or think, or talking about awe and wonder and fascinating pictures of the universe and things like that, and those are all great, but it doesn't demand anything of the practitioner. And so what I like about things like this is that I believe that a spirituality should affect something you're doing with your time and your day. It doesn't mean you're always necessarily doing that kind of thing, but there should be something that shows on your. It should demand some kind of something of the practitioner, more than just proclaiming things.
Well, who is it? Alain de Botton, who's the guy who's behind non-religious ritual for atheists. Is that the guy, Mark? The one who's pushing how even if we're not religious, we still need the community and the ritual and the fellowship, as it were, to use technically a sexist term. That religious people get, and we don't, as non-believers, non-faith-based people. And so it's good to have some kind of ritual, even if in this case it's only once a year. But maybe some folks will try and keep to this some kind of 7-day schedule or something. I think that's part of the intent behind the handbook, is to get people used to steady practice, as it were.
That's kind of the thing that Stoic Week drives home for me. I've been on a Musonius Rufus kick the last few months, and Musonius is big on that the inculcation of virtue is basically a habit. Mm-hmm. And Stoic Week tosses that in my face in a way that I can ignore in my regular life, because I have this thing in the background. Oh well, need to check the handbook and see what we're doing today. And every morning that's what I'm presented with. This is probably something I should be doing a lot more often than 1 week out of the year.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. You've got ritual and community that both came up in the conversation, and it's something that I feel like is missing a lot. It's what I admire about what Daniel's doing with the SNS is, my test is always, who's going to bring you a casserole? When somebody dies in your family, is somebody going to bring you a casserole? Which, it sounds like a very superficial kind of thing, but it's a good test for whether you've got a real community or whether you've got, people that talk about things that they enjoy on Facebook. But that community can help support you in that ritual. I guess the Stoic ideal is, that you can, well, I guess I shouldn't say that it's rugged individualism or independence, but ideally you should be able to do this stuff based on your own, motivation and self-determination. But in real life, it really helps to have other people around that are doing the same thing, that, even if you're not relying on them for guidance, it helps to know that there's other people doing it. I think that's a big part of the value of Stoic Week for me.
I was going to say it depends on the casserole, but I guess that's not a very Stoic attitude.
But that doesn't seem
casserole.
I'm very interested to hear after the fact what newbies to Stoicism have to say about this. People who maybe weren't that aware of Stoicism or that knowledgeable about it going through a week like this, and I'd be really interested to hear that because I've been involved with Stoicism and reading about it and practicing it in various ways for so long that I guess it's almost become kind of alien to me, the idea of talking to somebody who's brand new to it.
We got another person here. Matt. I can't hear you. Are you?
He's probably just trying to get his camera and mic set up.
Okay.
It looks like he's got his mute picture on, but yeah. Well, to the point about newbies, I think one of the things I like about this year is using Aurelius as kind of the framing device, because to me, on the groups and things like that, the document that people are a new person is most likely to be referred to is the Enchiridion. But I think that's kind of a rough jump into the deep end kind of way of looking at it, whereas I feel like the meditations, you get more of a sense of, here's a guy who's really trying to do it. You get more of a peek into his subjective experience. He says things that, at least for me, that I can relate to, like, boy, that really sounds like me trying to do this. He admonishes himself for, failing again, but he gets back up on the horse, and it just, to me, I find it very inspiring. So I'm glad that they used him as the framing device this year.
Mm. Yeah.
Matt, can you? Your voice is not coming through, but I don't see the.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Really,
hi guys.
really loud and scratchy. Like you're in a hurricane there. You brought your facial hair though. That's good.
It's a requirement.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's much better. Yeah, vastly,
yeah, we don't need to
better.
play it this big time. Yeah, sorry, I didn't know I'd suddenly pop in magically. I just pressed. Let's see how the link goes, and here I am. So
Okay.
And look, I apparently need to sit up taller. I feel so small.
Do you guys see yourselves in a rectangle and everyone else in a box, or is mine?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well, I
I'm
do
in the rectangle and you're in a box. That's right.
I don't self-identify as a rectangle. Sorry.
Yeah, I was born a rectangle, but I feel more like a box.
I was just curious if I was the only one that my screen was like that. Okay.
Okay, just a quick note to viewers. There's a question and answer box. Anyone who wants to just announce himself or send a question or a comment, please feel free to just use that box.
Where would we see that? Is that the
You
upper
can't. I
left?
don't. You have to hit that little Q&A button,
Oh, I see it.
control bar.
That blue.
It's kind of turquoise, I think.
Yeah, if you
Oh, yeah. Okay. I
yeah,
see.
yeah. If you're on a laptop, it might be off the screen, but if you move your mouse over the left-hand side of your screen, it'll pop up this little control bar. And it'll be a
Do we
little.
have any other viewers right now, or?
There's at least one, but I don't trust it. I don't trust the thing. But
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Is that I'd like to put the recording of this on our YouTube channel, and over time that way more people can see it.
that's fine. I'll make sure and save a copy.
So, how long has everybody here been involved with Stoicism as I guess a practitioner, or started getting into it or learning about it?
Well, I want to say about 2.5 years myself.
That's all you've been doing the podcast that long.
Okay, well, 3 years now. Something like that.
This is my third Stoic week, so I'm just going to go ahead and say 3 years, but it's probably slightly longer than that.
Okay.
As far as serious studying and practicing goes, probably about 3 years, although I've referred back to those writings for quite a long time.
I started about 2010, so it's about 5 years.
And somewhat similar for me to Mark. About 5 years.
So I guess this whole internet thing has been partly responsible for kind of a resurgence of Stoicism, would you say? Or has this been going on and I've just haven't been aware of it until the internet was around and let me know about it?
I was thinking, I was talking with Tim LeBon in that interview, and I speculated when I was talking with him that I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, yeah, it's the internet, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's kind of a self-help movement, as it were, without the frou-frou trappings of a lot of the other self-help crap that's out there. It's old, it's tried, it's true, it's tested, it's got a pre-built doctrine, and it's a little malleable. You can kind of change it to a certain extent. That for instance, maybe you don't believe in, maybe you're like, who is it, Irvine, who doesn't really believe in arete so much as ataraxia. Maybe you don't. Maybe you believe a little more in chaos than providence, and a lot of people, nobody believes in Zeus hardly. I hope I'm not offending anybody or anything. So, it is malleable. It is interpretable, as it were, and it's a big church. It welcomes a lot of people. You can be a Christian, you can be an atheist, you can be something in between, you can be a Buddhist, and still fit in. So I think that's why people like it, because it's a really classical and classy self-help movement.
Yeah, a lot of the self-help stuff out there tells people what they want to hear more than what they need to hear.
Yeah.
And I was giving a talk at our. My wife and I go to the Jade Buddha Temple here in Houston, and so they have the lay folks once in a while give the Dharma talks, and so I gave a talk on how Stoicism, as a Westerner, Stoicism kind of opened the door to a lot of these concepts for me in a way that would have been a lot more difficult to grasp if I had come directly into Buddhism without having first had some exposure to Stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
Because while there's a lot of consistency and overlap between a lot of the philosophic ideas and principles in Stoicism and Buddhism, as a Westerner, it's easier to come in through that doorway because you're not having to deal with a lot of the language issues and a lot of the culture issues. I mean, there's language differences. We don't speak ancient Greek, or at least I don't. But still, I mean, there's a certain, it's closer to the Western mindset, or at least easier for us to relate to than diving directly into some of the deeper Buddhist stuff directly. So my talk to them was basically how it makes a good introduction to a lot of these concepts. And I also talked a little bit about how it's kind of a similar path, but there's the signposts are at different points along the path. So certain things I've noticed Stoicism does really well, and then other things I think Buddhism does really well. So I use a mix.
Yeah, I've never heard anybody refer to Stoicism as esoteric, but you hear that word used with Eastern philosophy all the time. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've been interested in Buddhism for decades, but still, people in the West think of it as esoteric.
The closest thing in the West I think there is to that sort of thing is Heraclitus, which of course predates Stoicism officially, but was a big influence on it. But I think his writings come very close to those that you might expect from Zen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the Pythagoreans were pretty into that.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting things, at least that I've noticed over the last year or so, has been much more of an emphasis in the Stoic community on the physics side. And I'm not a true believer in the providential universe or anything like that, but I think that's very interesting, and I'm glad that people are bringing it up and really thinking about it and taking it seriously. But when you get into some of that stuff, esoteric might not be the right word, but it can be just as challenging in terms of, when you get into the ethics part, it's very practical, very hands-on, very easy to accept without, like you said, it's very adaptable to other belief systems. But when you get into, the physics that is at least, supposed to be the basis of the ethics or, recursive relationship between them, some of those physics ideas are just as challenging to me as some of the more, esoteric Buddhist metaphysical claims. And it's been really interesting to be involved in those conversations and to see how people that take those claims much more seriously than myself, interpret the world and how it affects their practice.
There's a dissertation that I'm reading now by Dr. DeHarven, if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, and it's 105 pages on Stoic ontology. And so when I first read Seller's book, and it talked about the difference between bodies which exist and then incorporeals which subsist, that was a sticking point for me because I couldn't really grok it, and I didn't have anything to tie it to, and it felt like a weaselly way around. It felt like a dodge. I didn't understand it enough, and it seemed like a less than forthright thing. So I've been interested in it since. But it's heady stuff. So you've got classic categories of things and not things, and I'd go ahead and call that esoteric pretty easily. But
so
it's a really interesting read. I'll throw a link up if someone's interested.
I'm sorry, what was that, Kevin? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, it's interesting. I've been working through it for a couple weeks now, actually, slowly. But I'll throw a link up. It's available online if anyone else is interested.
I think as a naturalist and somebody who kind of looks at the world in a modern scientific lens or whatever, I think what the challenge is for us as Stoics, and part of what we need to be doing is taking the essence of these descriptions of Stoic physics and saying, okay, so what essentially is being discussed here, and how does that connect to the prescriptives of Stoicism? And where can we find those same essential concepts in our modern understanding of cosmology and physics? And I think that one of the reasons that Stoicism is still so relevant is because you have these modern correlates to ancient understandings that really align pretty well, I think. Like for me, the exist and subsist, to me that just plugged right into complex systems theory and the idea of emergent properties. You know, to me that's kind of just a continuation of that line of thought. So I'd be interested to know, like Kevin, what did you finally conclude regarding the subsisting versus existing bodies and that sort of thing?
I don't have any conclusions yet. The thing that started to make it click for me was a discussion of traffic. So the idea of things that subsist, they are not bodies themselves, but they supervene on bodies. So traffic is something we can describe, we can see, we can talk about traffic's flow, we can talk about its path, we can talk about its speed, and so it's a valid thing for discourse. So it's clearly something. But absent the cars, it doesn't exist. So unless you have those cars present, there's nothing really to discuss per se. But it's still a valid topic for philosophical discussion. So it was that example of cars and traffic that started to put it together. But I'd be totally lying if I told you I understood it.
But that's a perfect example, because that's exactly the kind of thing that complex systems theory addresses. And complexity science is it really got going in the 80s, so it's pretty new. But it looks at the underlying kind of underlying consistency of theory between things like traffic, flocks of birds, even consciousness, and other kind of organisms and other kind of organic systems, and non-organic systems can sometimes be complex systems by this definition. And the mathematics of how all that works and how properties emerge that aren't, you wouldn't say they're a ghost, you know, you wouldn't say they're supernatural, but they do exist, but yet you can't put them on a scale. And I think that that was essentially what the Stoics were trying to address when they, you know, came up with these concepts, or at least in that one particular example.
Yeah, I think that kind of thing is interesting. I guess where I struggle with it is how it actually influences the ethics, how it actually influences the practice. I'm curious as to, like, what could we find out about those topics that would change the way you practice? And I guess this is a question for everybody, but you know, the idea that, you know, the ethics and the physics are related in some way. What is your understanding of that? What would change, you know, if you discovered something different about the physics that would change your practice of the ethics? Is there anything?
Are you talking to me?
Just really a question for everybody. You know, as we talk about the physics part of it, I'm just kind of curious as to what we see, if anything, is the relationship between the two. That's sort of where I've always struggled.
I'll back out for a second. I feel like I've been talking too much.
The thing for me where for physics underlying the ethics, I'm going to have to dodge. I don't think I have a good answer to your question, Ben. I don't know about something that would change my practice. But for me, the starting point of oikeiosis, it's descriptively, I think, accurate. So this idea that we start off with an affinity for our own organism, our own self, our own life, and then within the Stoic parlance, at, you know, the tensions of pneuma, we can extend that out to other rational creatures and other societies. To me, the strength is as a descriptive model, maybe not necessarily a prescriptive one. So when you talk about sort of, say, the revealed faiths of the West, the Abrahamic religions, we start off from an assumption of altruism, and it's an axiom or it's an assumption. But when you have a process like oikeiosis, it's descriptive, and for me at least, it matches my reality. I kind of care a little bit that I continue on, and that makes more sense to me. And because it's easier for me to grok than the next step of, well, then I have these extra obligations, because it does sort of match my experience of reality.
So it's like inspirational and motivational versus prescriptive, or it doesn't change your specific actions, but it helps motivate you to practice.
That's true for me, yeah.
These concepts are not unlike, say, in Buddhism, concept of interconnectedness. Well, that's a general kind of word in a very non-technical, descriptive form, but it's still consistent with scientific understanding of the universe. We have like a non-locality and principles of interaction and cause and effect, and all those things are part of our understanding. And certainly these ideas that the Stoics had about physics went into forming history, which led up to our scientific understanding that we have today of the cosmos. And if you were going to point to an example of something that might really fundamentally change your idea, let's say that you were a person who thought that what's that thing called? The secret,
Like if you wish for something.
The law of attraction.
The law of attraction, right. If you were a person who thought that that was really how the universe operated, I can see that that would have a big effect on what you control and what you don't control. So how do you practice the Stoic doctrine of control? If you really believe that sitting there and caring or thinking about something is going to actually alter something physically outside of your mind out there, that could be have a huge impact on your practice. And I'm not even sure how Stoicism would even hold together under that kind of a dramatically different understanding of reality.
Well, after watching the forums for a few years, I haven't bumped into any talk about that. I've seen everything under the sun, but not that.
And yet there are a lot of people out there that talk about that stuff. And so, I mean, that's just one example of how physics is going to come into a subject like Stoicism. I mean, that could be a really fundamental disagreement people get, and also, I mean, something more mainstream, I guess you could say. Some people believe in the power of prayer to beyond internal focusing based sorts of things, but like motivating external deities to do things. All of that plays into what we control and what we don't control. So, my experience with Stoicism is almost solely as a naturalist. So, it gets really complicated, I think, when you throw these different worldviews into it.
Yeah, I think you do. You end up getting a lot of, because the internet is such an open place and the groups are, relatively open. You do get a lot of people with different points of view trying to synthesize, and it's interesting to watch that. But to return to your earlier question, Daniel, about how the internet, what role it's played, I think it's been a huge role. I mean, maybe 1/10 of 1% of people, if we're being very generous, are interested in this stuff. And what are the chances we would have found each other otherwise? I mean, Kevin and I probably grew up, like you said, maybe 30, 40 minutes from each other, but our chances of even bumping into each other and sharing the interest just seem like microscopically small. So I'm very grateful for the technology. I think it's been a huge help.
Yeah, but I always toyed with the idea of face-to-face Stoic community, and I think it would be great, but I just don't think it's workable now. I think without the internet, there wouldn't be any, like you're saying, Ben.
Yeah, there's a face-to-face meetup in Pittsburgh.
Really?
And I haven't really actually been able to attend. I feel like such a slacker. I'm so fortunate to have something like that. and I've never been there. But even that is basically facilitated by the internet because people meet on Meetup and they meet in Facebook groups and things like that. So it's I think it's been a real boon. And I don't think we're the only community that's experienced that. There's lots of very minority interests out there that it's enabled us to find each other in a way that we wouldn't have otherwise. So.
Well, I mean, we've faced similar challenges here in Houston for a number of years now. I've been organizing and moderating discussion groups and other sorts of gatherings in person, and these are, I would say, a more general category of people who are not religious but interested in what are traditionally called spiritual practices. And that's, I mean, you could say Stoicism is a subset of that, especially naturalistic Stoicism. And so even at that larger kind of broader category, it's difficult, even in a city the size of Houston, which is about to overtake Chicago as the third largest city in the U.S., it's still difficult to get and maintain a body of people consistently attending a group over time. So we are, and then when you narrow it down to philosophy and ancient Greek and then Stoicism, it gets even more and more smaller. So yeah, it's kind of rough, but I think what can happen though is that as our community grows through these sorts of interactions, you'll get more and more people, and as you get more and more people involved, that presents more and more opportunity for local clusters to emerge. I hope so, anyway.
I mean, if you look back at the early Buddhist founding of early Buddhist sanghas back before World War II, there were virtually none, and they didn't have the internet, of course, and then it took a world war and our involvement in the Pacific Theater, and then, people coming back here after being occupation troops and stuff and saying, oh, we kind of liked hanging out in some of the temples around Kyoto, and so let's think about, forming some, importing some roshis over from Japan and, forming some Zen groups here and stuff like that. And they didn't have the internet. We have the internet, but we don't have anything pushing, any big world events pushing things, toward Stoicism or toward Greek philosophy in the same way. So it could be a long slog, even compared to back then when people didn't have the internet, unless something else happens, like to make people become, well, I don't know. A lot of people are getting into mindfulness now, and then CBT is pushing a lot of people towards Stoicism. I've noticed. So there is that.
Yeah.
I think one of the... Go ahead, Ben.
No, go ahead.
I think one of the issues that we face that sort of the westernizing of Buddhism didn't face is there's a pretty solid 2,500-year-long tradition there. And we're in this untenable space of bridging a 1,500 or 1,800-year gap. And so there's a perceived legitimacy issue there. So if you're a Westerner who's interested in Buddhism, that's generally seen as an okay thing. I mean, it's a little bit strange for the standard Western culture, but it doesn't seem totally off the wall of trying to pour it into 2,000-year-old philosophy to 2015. So, for instance, down the street from me is a Jain temple. So that's a little bit older than Buddhism, but it's pretty niche. I've never even seen a Jain structure anywhere, but there's one here in Dallas on my road. So they have this huge tradition. They're not even supposed to use planes most of the time, if I recall. The monks travel by foot most of the time. But so here's a very small niche thing, but it has that tradition, and that gives them some momentum that we lack currently.
So what I was going to ask is, and it kind of builds on this topic, is I have people in my day-to-day life, and they stumble on my blog and they read it. And they ask me, well, what is this? What is this Stoicism stuff that you're into? And I found that I'm usually just kind of like sputtering out an answer. I don't have a good elevator pitch to say, okay, well, here's my 60-second presentation. This is what Stoicism is about. So I'm curious as to whether anybody else does. If somebody asks you, they just walk up to you on the street and they say, well, what is the Stoicism you're into? What's it all about? Do you have, what do you tell them? This is for anybody to answer.
What do you tell them, Mark?
I just unmuted. Okay. I tell them that, of course, my version of Stoicism is very secular, and it's just the ethics. I don't have anything, any real familiarity with the physics, but I start off with Stoicism is, or my Stoicism is based on the value that there's nothing good except virtue. That's the starting point, and it's not something that you can prove. It's not like an objective good. It's not a moral statement that holds true. It's just a value that I have, and I think a lot of people have, and from there you can derive the three things that you absolutely need. The three exercises or the three studies that consume you. The assent, the impulse to act, and your desires. You spend all day, every day, learning to control those things because that's the only thing that you can control. That's about how I would summarize it. The only thing that I would add is that there's another value besides virtue being the only good, the value of altruism, or the value of oikeiosis, that we, the hive is more important than the bee. And if you don't agree with that, then the rest might become problematic, although there are a lot of people that are a little more into ethical egoism than I could be.
You could look at that as a subset of virtue, too.
You mean ethical egoism?
No, being
altruistic, or
altruistic, integrated with humanity and all beings and things.
Yes, when I think of the virtues, I think of the four. I rarely consider anything else, even though they did talk about other virtues. But the big hitters, they consume me, and I don't think I have a chance of really getting any of them down pat. But yeah, I have spent a little bit of time looking at the other virtues, but not nearly enough.
I kind of look at it generically, like I do this in Buddhism with the Eightfold Path too. It's kind of the general idea of living in accord with the nature of a rational moral being. And so how you bottle up those and present them, how you list them, to me that's kind of it's an exercise that's helpful to focus your attention on different things, but I don't really pay attention to any kind of official list, or there's value in a lot of different ways of framing virtues.
As far as elevator pitches, and I've never felt great about it. It's always always feel too inadequate in whatever it is I say if I say it quickly. But in general, I like to just tell people it's a life philosophy that makes the claim that that if I accept that there are things that are in my control and things outside of it, and if I understand well what truly is in my control, then I can flourish. And I just tell them that the lion's share of the philosophy is laying out an argument for what we control and what is truly valuable, and then helping us learn how to focus our thoughts and actions on those things, with the understanding that we'll thrive in life if we do so.
Elevator speech sounds kind of proselytizing to me, and I don't usually do that. So, like, if I have to give a short quip, I usually toss out the phrase "philosophy is a way of life" to distinguish it from an academic or hobbyist perspective. I usually will talk about Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus because they're fixtures in Western culture, and so I do definitely very broad strokes. That it's a way to kind of focus and regulate your life, to be a good person, and to frame one's focus that way.
I usually feel totally inadequate to the task, and I usually refer him to either Donald's book or his intro book or Irvine's book. Yeah, if somebody's interested.
I think I like to start with the words that other people typically use more rather than the official Stoic words or anything like that. So I usually say I hit that misperception first, and I usually say, well, Stoicism isn't really about suppressing your emotions or anything like that. It's about learning to deal with unhealthy and unhelpful emotions and changing your views so that you can have a flourishing life and have healthy, helpful emotions. And I generally don't like using the word emotions when I get into more formal discussions of Stoicism, but I'll use it like in the first few sentences like that.
If I can interrupt real quick, there's a question from the internet. I think everybody here has bumped into JCell at the on the forums.
Yeah.
He says, "Can y'all see the question?"
Mm-hmm.
I guess I shouldn't say it anyway because it won't be on the recording. What are the guests' opinions on the new popularizers or writers of Stoicism? Tim Ferriss, Ryan Holiday, Massimo Pigliucci, William Irvin, Donald Robertson, and John Sellers. Any affinities for particular persons?
Oh, I'd hate to call John Sellers a popularizer.
Well, it's not academic. It's definitely, but I have a lot. That his book is one of the things that, The House Burns Down. That's one of the books that I'd replace. I'd definitely replace that one.
Nice.
Yeah, I think Sellers' book Stoicism is, for me, the textbook on Stoicism. I might recommend something like the spiritual teachings of Marcus Aurelius, something very light, which is a summary written in a little more poetically of a lot of things like that, for a very new person, especially if they were new to philosophy in general. But yeah, I really like Sellers a lot.
I mean, I'll just be honest here and say that I think most of these people will be around in 5 years. I don't think Tim Ferriss will. He'll be moved on to something else in a year or so, just judging by his past. But I know Irvine, Donald, Sellers, of course. I mean, my God, he's built his career around it. Those guys will be around. Massimo, probably Ryan Holiday too, for that matter. But the whole thing of popularizing, is, I don't know if it's kind of a misnomer. It's like saying vulgarizing or something like that. I mean, people just create different flavors of stuff to read. I don't know if I even like the word popularizing.
We had a discussion yesterday. We had a meetup of Portland Stoics.
Cool.
Yeah, a whole three of us. Woo! So, hey, that was more Stoics than I'd seen in a physical room in my
Yeah, there you go.
actual experience. So, but we were talking about things like this, and I I think that the light I don't know how to say it the popularizer slash vulgar side of Stoicism, probably embodied by Tim Ferriss in some sense, um, gets a bit of a bad rap in that I am glad that principles that I think are solid mental principles are being used by people
Hmm.
to better themselves. And when other people hear, from somebody who excitedly writes about Stoicism, and some of them will take the same lessons, which tend to be the ethics on the almost, somewhat more on the egoism side, and run with it. And if it, helps them get over some anxiety and do well on their goals, then in general, great. And then there will be other people who suddenly stumble upon and find that there may be a richer form of the philosophy that they can tap into, and so double great for that. But I would, I would take a society of people who had a loose but usable understanding of some of the ethical principles of Stoicism, even if they weren't taking everything, over a lot of options that I could have in the way people address things in life. Now, do I prefer the fuller, more what I consider a richer and broader perspective of Stoicism? Absolutely, but I think sometimes we can spend too much time berating people that we look at as putting one foot into the Stoicism when it's an indifferent, right? So
I think it's probably particularly easy here to throw stones. I think there's a reason for it. So I think I'm comfortable with saying generally that all of these folks are doing some good work for Stoicism and for Stoics. I don't agree with all of the interpretations that are present with those authors, but I think the problem we have is a bottlenecking. So necessarily when you're introducing someone to something that's a broader topic of Stoicism, they're going to have to splash around in the shallow end of the swimming pool before they go out and they're ready to do breaststrokes. And so I think most of the authors that we're talking about here are doing that. They're teaching small lessons in the shallow end of the pool, and it's a necessary step, or else you don't go swimming elsewhere. So I wouldn't belittle the work that any of those folks are doing. I'd have some academic disagreements with some of the interpretations, but generally I think that we're seeing good things there.
Do any of you guys have an opinion on Tad Brennan? Because his book is one of my favorites.
No,
I just started it a couple weeks ago, and I'm only about into like chapter 3 right now. But it's great so far. It's
What's the title of that one? I'm not familiar with it.
The Stoic Life by Tad Brennan.
To check it out.
I enjoy it.
Yeah.
Is my opinion.
I guess I don't really have anything to add as far as these authors go. I agree with most of what you all have said, but I would say I probably get more genuine satisfaction from reading the blogs of some of them written by people that are on this call right now, because I like to see people working through this stuff. A book by nature is, here I'm finished, I'm making this completed argument for you, and there's some interaction there, and that you take it in and you decide what you're going to do with it and so on. But like, if I'm reading Kevin's blog, for example, and he is dealing with a particular concept and saying, okay, well, here's one way of looking at it, and I'm thinking about it this way, and what do you think? Just watching people go through that process and go through it with them as they're dealing with some of these things, I find that more gratifying than even most of the finished works.
Yeah,
I don't think I'd have a problem with any of these folks, until somebody started charging, like $1,500 for a weekend of Marcus Aurelius business strategy seminars, or something like that, then I might start grousing about them. But I'm pretty much with you guys, where as long as somebody's getting the word out, you're right. I mean, it might take somebody to a little deeper study eventually.
Yeah, I'd have to say the thing that helped me the most was I spent about 5 years or so. I haven't been on it for a few years, but about 5 years or so on the International Stoic Forum, which is just a Yahoo email group. But there were so many knowledgeable people on there, the professors there and everything, and the other practitioners and other people. Just having them there to answer my questions and have discussions with them about things, it was a real like a cold kiln of applied, down to earth examples of how these philosophies work out, and that's probably the most useful thing I've experienced in learning Stoicism. And I meant to mention earlier, Irvine's book, I think of as another one of those that I would. It's the joy of, or the Stoic Art of Joy. As another one of those that I would consider a good introduction. Although, like some of you said, I don't fully agree with some of its interpretations. The only thing we have to watch out for, really, is that when we have these kind of more popularized or more informal sorts of interpretations of Stoicism to make it easier on people, the only thing we have to watch out for are some of the pitfalls that might result in actually kind of a backwards or a harming sort of practice. Like it's possible for somebody to misunderstand Stoicism and think that it's about suppressing or denying emotions or something. And if they think that, then they could actually be doing harm to themselves. And I tell people, if you're trying to suppress something, then you've already failed in that instance at the Stoic endeavor, because the idea is a long-term cultivation of a character in which those things just naturally don't arise. So it's not about suppressing or controlling your emotions, but becoming a different kind of person so that the emotions are naturally healthy. So that's just one example. There's other examples, like I think Irvine talks about negative visualization, but I view negative visualization as a pretty advanced Stoic practice. And if you get the wrong person doing that too early before they're ready, it could actually result in a lot of depression or kind of fear-generating or anguish-generating sorts of experiences. So there are a few pitfalls that you have to watch out for and make sure that people don't miss it. Here's another classical one, the third one example, is thinking that accepting of something means not acting or allowing things to happen without, misunderstanding the difference between internal acceptance and laying down and not doing anything, So that's just like 3 examples of certain pitfalls that you have to watch out for whenever you're generalizing or trying to make it easier to understand Stoicism.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up, Urban, bringing up negative visualization, because one of my first experiences, I think, with Stoicism was, I'd read that book and I found it, inspiring. I thought it well written, and the way he presented negative visualization was more about doing that for the sake of appreciating what you have more. Mm-hmm. And I went out on and I forget what group, probably in Donald's group on Facebook, and talked about my experience with that. And there was some gentle correction of, okay, well, that's fine if that's why you want to do that, but traditionally negative visualization in Stoicism means something else, and here's what it means. The fact that somebody took the time and explained that to me in a fairly cordial way made all the difference. And I think it speaks to, our responsibility when people come in, maybe with ideas that are, a little off base or just a little different than the way they were presented in the early Stoicism, of being kind and not jumping on people and that kind of thing, because that does happen online, and I think it's a shame, and I've been guilty of it too, I guess, sometimes. So I try to remind myself that we're all on a different page.
You guys have noticed unkindness online? That's where?
Noticed or perpetrated?
Not my internet.
Well, that's a great. It's a great testing field. I mean, when you see a community online that's refreshingly different, it says something really profound about what it is they're talking about and practicing. So hopefully that's what we can be.
So, guys, it's been an hour. Do we want to start thinking about commencing to begin to form a committee to decide whether we want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we ought to think about wrapping it up and letting everybody get on with it, because we're not all in the same time zone. We've pushed. I think we pushed Ben out to 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and I am firmly middle-aged now, so this is a little bit past my bedtime.
Okay.
Man, I'm old enough to be your dad if this were Tennessee.
Well, I really appreciate you guys, your time and being a part of this, and I hope people find it helpful.
Okay. You should be able to find the link to the video, Daniel, but if I'll make sure I'll download a copy myself, and I'll make that available to you through like a Dropbox or a Google Drive or something if you can't get it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, guys. Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thanks for letting me jump in. See ya.
Thanks.